Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasr, and this is the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. Pizza and drinks are over on the my left side, and the courtesy of Inito. The Wi-Fi password, if you're interested, ROC 3001, and that is for the ROC 3 network. And a little bit about the group. We meet here every month, typically every fourth Thursday. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover any and all topics related to .NET. You can find meeting information on meetup.com and search for Cleveland C VB.NET user group. A big thank you to our sponsors, Tech Systems, for sponsoring the meeting space. The pizza and drinks over on the left, courtesy of Inito. And also we have a prize giveaway courtesy of PostSharp, and NIS Technologies as providing the web hosting for us. Some general information. Restrooms, if needed, are down the hallway on the right-hand side. Always keep in mind that participation is encouraged, so despite the auditorium-style seating, feel free to jump in anytime with questions or comments. And last but not least, if you would please mute your cell phones. So tonight's presentation is going to be about JavaScript web workers, communication, and storage features. A little bit about me. I've been a software developer since 1995. I started a company called NIS Technologies, where we do consulting and training. I've also been certified with a few certifications from Microsoft, and I've been running this user group for 13 plus years, and also host the .NET Study Group online. I've also authored several articles for Visual Studio Magazine, and I've been Microsoft MVP since 2013. So jumping into tonight's presentation, the first item is web workers. And what a web worker is that it's a script that is running in the background. We spawn it through a JavaScript, and we're able to execute another JavaScript in the background. So this helps us to actually perform multiple tasks without affecting the user experience on the front end. So the background process has access to APIs where we can make calls to the server and retrieve data, but it cannot access the DOM directly. Only the main thread that's running in the browser can access the DOM directly and manipulate the DOM. So essentially what this is used for, it's used for concurrency or mimicking concurrency. So this is very similar. It's not really multi-threading per se, but it allows us to run multiple processes in concurrency where we can spawn off another process, have it execute, and then we can pass messages to and from the worker or the boss. So the boss is what spawns off the worker process. The boss is essentially your main thread that's running in your browser, and then you spawn off additional worker processes. There are two types of worker processes. There is a dedicated worker that is dedicated only to that single thread, and we use the worker object for spawning that. And then for shared workers, where it can be accessed by multiple scripts outside of the main process, we use the shared worker object. Once we spawn a worker process, essentially it's going to be running in an isolated thread. It won't have any impact on the boss thread, if you will, but rather it can pass messages back to and from. So eventually we have event handlers that are set up where we have the on message that is set by the boss, and then we have the post message set by the worker. So whenever the worker needs to pass back a value to the boss thread, it makes a call to the post message, or excuse me, the post message event handler. So this is a mechanism for exchanging messages back and forth between the two. To get a better idea of it, let's jump into a demo. And I'm going to run this in Firefox. Not yet, but soon. If you email me, I'd be happy to send you the demos. And let me open up the script in Visual Studio. And as Visual Studio usually is, it takes a few minutes. Okay, while we're waiting for that,
Since I'm not familiar with web workers, et cetera, I have heard of service workers in relation to PWAs
PWAs.
like progressive web apps.
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I'm not sure. And I'm very bad with acronyms too, by the way. All right, so looking at our script, basically we have some basic HTML tags that we specify in the upfront. And then we have a paragraph element there. We're going to be indicating the status. And this is going to be an output element with an ID of result. And what we're doing here is we're going to be updating this result with anything we get back from the worker process. We have two buttons here for starting and stopping the worker. And what they do is essentially on click, we call the start worker. And then for the stop worker button, obviously the method that, or the event handler that we're calling here is stop worker. What start worker does, and here is the JavaScript. We have a global variable W for the worker. And what we're doing here is we're checking to see that the browser does support the worker object. And if it does, then what we do is we instantiate a worker object, and notice that we're passing in worker proc1.js. Well, worker proc1.js, all it does is just simply say that we're sending a message back to the boss, and we're going to respond every 500 milliseconds or half a second. Can I make it a little blurry? How's that? Okay, so we're calling this worker proc1.js, and all this worker proc1 is going to do is going to call a function called timed count. What timed count does, it simply increments a global variable I that's declared up here, and then we respond with the post message method. And what we're doing here is we're sending the text sending message, and then we pass in that incrementer, that incremented variable. We wait half a millisecond, and then we repeat again. Okay, so looking at the main script, again, with start worker, what it's going to do is it's going to spawn a new worker process, and here we're calling it worker proc1.js. And then we're setting up our event handler. Here's our other event handler on message. This is where the boss is listening to the worker process. So whenever the worker process responds to the boss, what we're going to do here is we're going to retrieve the result element, which is what's defined up here. And then we're simply going to update it with the event.data, or the data that we're getting back from the worker proc. So looking at our example, here basically I have a status. I haven't started anything yet, so it's the field next to it is blank, and I have my two buttons. Once I click my start worker, and there you see it's incrementing that count every half a second. I stop it. Now looking at my script, what I'm doing here is I make a call to terminate on that worker proc, and then I set that object to undefined. And by doing that, it allows me to reuse the code. So now when I go back here and I start worker again, it starts all over again from 1. Okay? Any questions so far? Yes. I'm not sure if that's when they started doing it. I think it was actually a little bit previous to 2016. So let me stop this demo and let me start up another one. Correct. And here's the code again in its entirety. And it's just running a script within a simple HTML document. Okay?
The type of worker that you're checking, that's just
if the browser supports it or not. Correct. Depending on which browser. So if I was to run this in Chrome, let's say, should be loading up any second now. Seems like everything is slow during the holiday season, right? All right, so there's my familiar interface. And now when I click Start, nothing happens. And I'm running in Chrome. When I open up the developer tools, I see that because Chrome does not support it, I see that it gave me an error. Oh, too big. I see that it gave me an error where it failed to construct the worker object. Not supported in Chrome, surprisingly. Yeah. And I do have the updated version of Chrome. Well, this is basic JavaScript. It's core JavaScript. So it's not Angular and it's not jQuery per se. I mean, jQuery is built on top of JavaScript. So this is the underlying JavaScript foundation. And as you can tell, I didn't import any libraries. I'm not referencing anything else. All I'm doing is referencing this worker proc1.js, which is an even simpler JavaScript file. So which browser would support? Mm-hmm. There are some references that I have at the end of the presentation that you can reference for that. Okay. So now we started off our worker process and we were able to stop it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at another example, which is worker process task 1 and 2. So this is very similar to the one that we worked in, except in this case, I'm actually starting two separate processes. And if you recall from the slide, we said that these run in their own independent thread. So I'm still spawning worker proc1.js and then worker proc2.js. And just to show you that I'm staying honest, worker proc2.js is identical to worker proc1.js. The reason I'm doing this, I'm using the same variable names and I'm spawning both threads. It's to show you that everything runs separate of, or the threads run separate of each other. So taking a closer look at this example, let me load it up in Firefox. Correct, which still, I don't buy it as a valid reason, but that's their take on it. Yeah, it's because of this file protocol. Okay, so now I'm basically duplicating the work that I have done before where I have a web worker 1 and a web worker 2. Both are spawning the same process as far as the variable names that it contains. So here's web worker proc2, web worker proc1. They're both identical using the same variable names. But now when I run them, I can start and stop them independently. So here proc1 is on number 13. And I start web worker 2, and it starts its own independent count. Same variable name, because it's a different process spawned separately, therefore it runs in a different thread, and we don't have a clash. Running in two separate threads. And then likewise, I can also stop one without affecting the other, and then I can stop the second one at will. Good question. So are they threads or are they simulated threads? Because in JavaScript we don't support multi-threading technically, it's basically similar to it. So it's concurrency. Stops one process, goes to the other, executes it, and then goes back. It's similar to multi-threading in DOS, if you remember way back when, right? We have a single process, a single processor, and it's executing one at a time. No, that's the advantage of it. It's running in the background. It doesn't block my UI. Where it will block my UI is if I start running it and continue to spawn multiple threads, then eventually gets to the point where it bogs down the browser, and then eventually my whole system gets bogged down. So I have another sample code, but I won't run it till the very end if you're interested, because it simply brought my system down to a crawl. I was able to spawn up to approximately 10,000 different processes, and things slowed down ridiculously slow. So I'm holding off to the end to do that. Does it work in Edge?
Yeah.
I haven't tried it, but let's give it a shot.
So it would work in Chrome if you actually have a project and Visual Studio and loading up in the local, local host.
Yeah, but to run it off the local file system, it won't run.
Right.
Mm-hmm. A flag in the shortcut?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Allow file access to file.
So to answer your question, does it run in IE Edge? And here it is, where we spawned multiple threads, and they're both running independent of each other. I'm sorry?
It's going to be Chromium based soon.
Time will tell, right? Okay, any other questions? We work with the tools we're given, right? All right. So moving on, the next topic is WebSockets. And what WebSockets is, it's a standard way of communication, and it uses bi-directional TCP communication between the client and the server. So we can use it for both sending and receiving messages at the same time. It supports a low-level interface for sending and receiving data. So this is handled on the TCP level. That's what's meant by low-level interface. It operates over port 80 or 443 if we're doing secure. And we're able to send one message, HTTP rather, sends one message and it's done. Whereas with WebSockets, we're able to send and receive bidirectional or full duplex. So with a WebSocket, it operates over a single socket and it's exposed via the JavaScript interface and in HTML5 compliant browsers. So you can build a server process using Node.js or C# or any other language, and then you can communicate to it from the browser using a WebSocket. To do that, essentially we spawn a new WebSocket process where we call the WebSocket method, and then we pass in the URI. And notice here the protocol is WS for WebSockets versus WSS for secure WebSocket secure. So once we start the WebSocket and we initiate it and we specify the URI, then it starts the HTTP handshake where it's communicating with the server. And after the handshake is completed, then we can, either side can send or receive data at any time. So what this offers is a low latency and virtually near real-time connection between the client and the server. Some sample cases for this is if we're using multiplayer online games, and then, or chat applications, or you have something like a sports ticker where it needs to constantly update, or obviously a stock ticker, less important than scores, right? So the question may be, well, how do WebSockets differ from AJAX? With WebSockets, you have the three advantages: low latency, full duplex, and it's long running. Once we open the connection, we can maintain that connection and continue to communicate over it, as opposed to AJAX. The advantage of AJAX is that it's widely accepted in various frameworks due to longer existence. It's been around a lot longer, so you're going to find it in more frameworks. It has wider support in other browsers, older versions of browsers specifically, and it's more used by developers in general. Because it's been around for a longer period of time, it's gained a lot of acceptance and use in the development community. Well, we'll take a look at how we actually spawn that off, and then we can take a look at it in Fiddler in just a second. And let me open up the script in Visual Studio so we have a better idea. So what we have is just a simple HTML document, and we have three buttons on here: open connection, send message, and then close connection. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to have a server process to communicate with. So there is a WebSocket.org where they have a sample server application, and all it's doing is it's going to echo the message back. And so that's going to essentially simulate communication. Well, not simulate, it is actual communication. So we have two URIs. If I was to use the simple WebSocket protocol, it would be WS. And if I'm going to be utilizing the secure, it's going to be WSS for the WebSocket secure. Now what I'm doing here is I'm setting up event handlers. So for the function for onOpen, it's going to write to the screen that it's connected. For onClose, it's going to write to the screen that it's disconnected. And then same thing for onError and doSend. So these are all event handlers that will respond to the events whenever I open the connection, close the connection, or when I actually have a message that I sent, and of course onError. So the onMessage event handler, all it's doing is it's going to be writing to the screen. And then the write to screen basically just, it grabs the paragraph element in the document, and then it just simply appends the message to it, and then we're able to write that out to the screen. My open connection, what it's doing here is it's creating a WebSocket, and again, we're making a call to the WebSocket method, and we're passing in the URI for the WebSocket. And then here, we're just simply setting up all the event handlers for that WebSocket. So for WebSocket onOpen, we're going to call the function onOpen, and we're going to pass it in the event information. Same thing with the others: onClose, onMessage, and onError. So looking at the demo page, again, here's my three buttons. Once I instantiate the connection, now I get the message that it's connected. Every time I send a message with the echo, well, I forgot the name of the site. echo.websocket.org. All it's doing is that server process is just simply responding back. So I simply send a message saying the current date and time is XYZ, and it responds back with that same message. And I can continue to go down the line, send message, and then it responds back. Once I close the connection and I'm disconnected. Now, if I send a message, it just shows me that it's sent. Nothing has been received. Okay. Any questions on WebSockets? No, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to relate this to SignalR. SignalR uses WebSockets, but for like the examples you gave for a good purpose for WebSockets, SignalR is great, and the fact that it's backwards compatible, it starts with WebSockets, but if WebSockets aren't supported, it goes back all the way to long polling, which goes up to whatever, 96 or whatever.
So with SignalR, it'll support multiple versions of browsers, both newer and older.
Yeah.
Whereas with WebSockets, it's obviously, again, much like the worker processes, it's built into the newer versions of JavaScript. So typically, if you have a browser that supports HTML5, it will also support WebSockets. True. Yeah, so as you can tell, it's not that complicated. Basically, I'm defining my method or my functions here, and then I'm setting to call those functions in my event handlers once I open up the socket. And to open up the socket, again, I just simply utilize or instantiate a WebSocket class, and I pass in the URI. And then from there, I just simply pass in the date time whenever I'm sending a message. And here's do send. And do send is defined. So do send will send the date and time that the string that I build here, and then it sends it, and then on reply, basically this on message is going to fire. I'm sorry? Right.
So using WebSockets, I mean, obviously you can send messages back and forth, but you know, you were comparing it to AJAX. And AJAX we use, well, I use to, you know, for like API calls or whatever, where I'm getting results back, and it's usually, you know, one and done or whatever.
Right.
Is that something that you foresee using with WebSockets, or is it just more for just sending messages back?
So are you saying use WebSockets to spawn an AJAX call?
Well, no, just to use WebSockets instead of AJAX.
Right, so you would use WebSockets instead of AJAX if you want constant concurrency. You want to maintain that connection, or you want to have bi-directional communication with more than just send and receive. AJAX is known to just, as you said, send once, receive a reply, and done. Whereas this, either party, once we establish the connection, either party can send and receive multiple times. Well, in this specific case, I'm sending the message, and then I'm getting a reply back. So it's a one-to-one correlation. However, if my server process was defined by some other means, meaning it would have multiple replies sent to me, I could receive them and handle them. Okay. Right. Stock ticker, sports ticker, right? So if you're following the Cavs, God bless you, first of all. Second of all, you'll see that the score gets updated multiple times.
you type a message in the browser, and you see the little three little dots that somebody's replying to, that's the socket. Because that's a persistent connection.
I can't say for sure that Skype is using that.
But it has to know that the person on the other end is actually typing back.
Right.
So they all do that.
So if I was developing that using WebSockets, then yes, I would capture whenever there's a keyboard entry, and then I would send a message to the client. Well, it's low-level TCP, so, but it does handle bi-directional communication. And like I said, it is not a one-to-one correlation. Either party could send multiple messages without waiting for a response. Right. And if you've ever been stuck with someone chatting online and they're overly chatty, sometimes they send multiple messages without giving you a chance to reply. Same thing here. Okay?
So, your example, you're showing basically the client side.
Right.
A server that we're just using the example,
Correct.
okay. So, the server would get to multiple
Correct. That was a question over here?
Does it have to be port 80?
Uh,
443.
it's,
443. Or can, or how do you talk to a socket other than 80 or 443? Do you just put the colon and the port number at the end like you do on your web browser? Can you not do it at all? Is there some other?
I'm not sure if you can specify the port number, but I know by default it runs over port 80.
Right.
I would have to make a educated guess and say, yes, you can change the port on it.
Yeah, because they could do something exactly like they did port 25 and start sending an email. Right, you know, that's the path I'm going on.
Right.
Can I do that?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Way to specify 25.
Right. I am pretty sure you can, but
Okay.
I'll be happy to follow up with you afterwards.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Okay.
How can I use this to write spam? Something like that.
You don't necessarily need this to write spam. Not that I advocate spam, but gotcha. Okay. Other questions? Fill that. All right, so the next item is ServerSent Events. And what a ServerSent event is when a page automatically gets updates from a server. So we don't have to use polling conditions or constantly check with the server repeatedly, but the server automatically notifies the client whenever there's an update. I'm sorry? Essentially, yes. So this is one way as opposed to WebSockets where it's bi-directional. And instead of us having to poll the server just simply sends an update to the client saying that new information is available. So this would be valuable in the case of a sports ticker or a stock market, because obviously these are all one-way directional or one-way communication. So this was something similar was possible before, but we had to constantly poll the server and request updates. With ServerSent Events, the updates come automatically. The other thing I wanted to talk about tonight was web storage. And with web storage, this allows web pages to be able to store information locally. And we can store it either per session, or we can store it local storage. So it's basically, it's persistent. It is not dependent on a specific session. So I can download information into the user's machine, and we can store that locally and then be able to access it at a later time. So it's more secure and faster than with cookies. The data is not included in every server request, but only when it's requested. And it allows large amounts of data, typically around 5.2 megs, to be stored on the user's machine. Correct. Not 5.1. So the capacity may vary. There are some browsers that allow for modification of that capacity. The data is stored in key value pairs, and I'll show you the demo in just a second. And the web page can only access the data that was stored by itself. So if I, for example, I am setting up a website, let's call it Automart, for example, and I'm going there to shop for a car. It will download all the models and it will store them on my machine. But if another car service, let's say CarMax, for example, not to pick on any specific vendor, they can't access something else that Automart had downloaded to my machine. So it's only specific to your web process. And there are two types of storage. There's local storage that stores data without expiration. So this is persistent. I can close down my session, open it up at a later time, even after I power off my machine, and I still have access to the data. And then there's session storage, and as the name suggests, it's only available for the duration of that session. So once I close my tab, that session has expired, and therefore that data is no longer available. The 5.2 capacity, typically that's the default number. So that is per website that you have. Correct. So once you clear your cache, that'll purge it. Correct.
And it's also not secure from the user, right? The user can just go dig through the file system and go look at their data, correct?
Technically, yes.
So it's not, yeah, don't stash anything in there that you, yeah. No HIPAA data, yeah. If it's their own, yeah.
Chances are it's going to be their own, right? If it's HIPAA data, right. So here you see I just opened up the demo for web storage, and let's take a look at that script. So here we have our sample HTML section, and then in our script, what we're doing is we're accessing local storage, and as I mentioned before, everything is done in key value pairs. So here we're storing it in the key called page hits local, and then there's another variable page hits session. So this script automatically executes whenever we load up the entire HTML page. And you see by default it was set to 0. And when I look at my script, here I have that there were 31 times that were stored in the local storage, and there's only 1 time for the session storage. And so as I continue to reload the page, you'll see that both continue to increment upwards. So now I am actually, and let me move my mouse, you'll see that the page has been accessed 37 times in the local storage, but 7 times in the session storage. So if I was to, let me copy this URL, if I was to close it and then start it up again, there you see my page access, which is the local storage. It retains that last incremented number, but the session storage starts over at 1 again. They're both 5.2 megs. No, combined for your website, it's just 5.2 megs. No. I'm sorry? And as you see, to access it, there really isn't a whole lot to it. Basically, here's a inline function in JavaScript. And what I'm doing is I'm defining a variable L storage for local storage. And then I'm checking to see if there's a page load count, if it exists, meaning if the user has accessed this key value pair before. And if they haven't, then I just simply set it to 0. and then I increment it by 1, and then just update that text field with the pages hit local, and the same thing for the pages hit, oh, sorry, my mouse is moving. For the pages hit session, it's the same thing.
And just as the window object.
Correct.
Nice. And it's just an object. You can just put whatever. It doesn't have to be keys. You can put nested objects.
Well, it's a key value pair.
That's okay. Key value.
Right.
Okay.
So I can serialize an object and put it in there and then deserialize it later. I can store JavaScript in there if I need to. It can be, sure. That's good to hear. Seriously.
Yeah, everything you put up here is saying, I'm told nothing I use this.
Good to know. Okay. Any questions on local storage? All right. So moving right along. Geolocation. So with geolocation, it allows us access to the user's location, assuming the user allows it, of course. Right. I see you're a skeptic like I am, right? I don't want Big Brother following me, so I block him. But if you want to give away your location, again, there's advantages to that because it tells you in some sites what promotions are available in your area. So to find out the geolocation of a user, basically you utilize an API that's built within JavaScript, and it retrieves the geographical location. So the user must approve it, as stated here in the second bullet. You're given the option to allow access or block it. And it's more accurate for devices with GPS. So the way it works is if I was to actually access it using my phone has a built-in GPS, right? So a GPS device is a lot more accurate than something with my laptop. My laptop can give away my location simply by the TCP IP address, whereas the phone, it's more specific with the GPS system built in. So the API, when it runs, it will check to see, does the device have a GPS built in? And if so, it will utilize that. Otherwise, it will go over into it will get the location information using the TCP IP address. Right. But if you're using your phone, which is more accurate, that'll give away your GPS. And again, assuming the user approves it. Okay. So
probably handy to approve it if you're looking for something to buy at Best Buy, and I'll show you the closest store instead of just guessing.
right. Or more specifically, weather information. So I'm sure you're updated on West Salem weather all the time, right? Yeah. I'm sorry?
Yeah, you know the pops on it.
Well, that's true. So it's an API call. Once we make the call, we are able to utilize get current position, which is a method to retrieve the user's position, or we can, in addition, get the user's position and specify the error handler that's going to handle any errors with that. Once we get the user's location, then we're able to have the chords object, and the chords object will give us latitude, longitude, accuracy, altitude, heading, and speed. So we have all those properties available to us through the chords object. And to see an example of the geolocation, well, obviously it's going to register as 0 or null. So here's my website. Basically, I have the location coordinates, and then I have a get location button. So looking at the code behind it, once we click the get location button, that's going to call the get location event handler. And what that does is, first we check to see that geolocation is supported by the browser, where we have the navigator object, and we check to see that geolocation is supported. If it's not supported, we just simply specify to the user that geolocation is not supported. If it is, then we make a call to get current position, and then we pass in the event handler, which is show position. What show position is going to do is just simply update my web page with the coordinates. So here, show position, when it gets called, it's going to be passed the position object. This position object will contain the coordinates object, which will contain latitude and longitude. So once I run it, there is my request for permission. I'll go ahead and click allow, and there is my latitude and my longitude. If I punch that into Google Maps, you're always a skeptic, Ron. I like that.
Nice.
Now Big Brother knows where I am. All right, time to run. Okay. And again, this is off my PC, so I don't have a GPS device built into it. Yeah, not bad, huh?
Yeah, it just knows that, and that's an IP address, is just 32 bits of crap. I mean, there's got to be a reverse lookup database somewhere that knows, that knows that.
That's my curiosity, is how does it resolve that from your IP?
Well, I'm connected to a service provider, and that service provider is registered.
Right.
And so they're able to, right.
And if you have dynamic IP, it's a little bit less accurate. If you've got, if you got an old dial-up line where you got a different IP every time you connect it, they can't be very precise.
Right. Well, even with cable modems, it's still a dynamic IP address.
Right.
Right.
There are some web services that actually do have a floating IP address. Building automation, I did work at McDonald's, and their original service provider was changing their IP address on them all the time, and they found this to be unacceptable, and they wound up getting a different service provider as a result of this.
You can pay a little bit extra to get a static IP address, and then you can run your servers from that location. But
yeah, it just depends on your upstream provider, not where you are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, again, looking back at the code, all I'm doing is making a call to an API, and it's the navigator geolocation.getCurrentPosition. And again, no libraries that are being imported. It's all part of JavaScript. Where could this be useful? I'm tracking your... Okay. For your specific area, even if you're not targeting ads and you're building an intranet site, let's say you have multiple locations, you can detect the user's location, give them address or weather information for that address, assuming you're not behind multiple firewalls and doing translation. Right.
Oh, wow, kids don't keep up with anything else. Let's just say you're evading law enforcement, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The database knows where the cops are. The app knows how to stay away from them. There you go.
Okay.
Lots of uses.
That's one
Lots of
application.
honest uses.
Right. Which I see you're up to this evening.
What are you getting at?
Not that I'm judging. So going along the lines of API calls, last but not least is Moderniser. So obviously browsers in the past have continued to evolve. How many different versions do we have of Chrome now? 64, right? How many versions of IE do we have? Well, they stopped at 11. How many versions of Firefox do we have? So needless to say, there's multiple versions. So whenever you're running an app, you need to know, does my browser support this type of application? Either you can come out front and tell your user that we only support these versions and these editions, or you can actually utilize something like Moderniser. So this is a library that's available, and it's used for detecting browser capabilities. You can download it free of charge from moderniser.com. And notice Moderniser is not spelled in the Merriam-Webster way. But essentially, to utilize it, I would reference it in my script tag. And then from there, I can detect different HTML capabilities. So looking at the demo of that, and more specifically, let's take a look at the code. So as I mentioned, you need to make a reference to the library. And in this case, I chose to download it and have it locally on my machine, but you can also reference it from Moderniser or the URL. And then all I'm doing here is in my JavaScript code, I'm checking to see, utilizing the Moderniser object, if moderniser.canvas, or in this case, not moderniser.canvas, then simply write the word not, followed by supported in this browser. So all I'm doing is, again, utilizing Moderniser dot and then checking for different options. Right. So it'll tell you if the browser supports it or not. So obviously, I'm not going to display something like this to my user, but I'll know in my code if I can run the geolocation URL, if I can utilize local storage, or any of these other features. So all it is, as I mentioned, just simple object calls. Can I bring that up an edge? Someone likes to push the envelope. Not supported. And if you're interested, we'll fire up IE11. Yeah, I could do that too. IE Edge does not support local storage. So let me fire this up first. I need to allow block content on here. And that's not supported in, so this is Internet Explorer in IE Edge. How do I find out the version on here?
The latest one, you don't get a choice.
No, well, it's under settings. But no, I meant, yeah.
Oh, there we go.
That's all based on what version we just handed. You have 1803 or 1809.
But in either case, in this version, you see that it's not supported. Okay. And obviously running it in other browsers, the results may vary. The point is, with a simple API call, I can find out whether to display a friendly message to my user, or just simply go ahead and execute my geolocation or my local storage APIs. As opposed to loading a page and getting null for an answer or nan. Doesn't look pretty, does it? It could be, because essentially we are storing something locally. So that may be. But in any case, not to get too far off topic, any questions about the API calls or Moderniser? Correct. The keyword there is gracefully doing alternates, right? You definitely don't want the user to see non or nan. You definitely don't want them to encounter null values or have a portion of the screen just be completely blank because you couldn't run geolocation API. Okay? Any questions? All right, if no questions for me, I got a few questions for you. What did we cover today?
Web workers, communication, and storage.
More specifically?
How to send spam, how to hide
Geolocation APIs, web workers,
Okay.
WebSocket,
Yeah, right. Essentially, most of these features, they came out, if you're, let me rephrase it. If your browser supports HTML5, it should support these features. Okay? What else did we learn? What kind of framework should you use? You don't have to use any framework. Again, this is all within the core JavaScript.
That's a whole different conversation.
JavaScript frameworks?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right, so when HTML5 was released, we actually had a newer version of JavaScript as well as CSS released at the same time. So you have all three that essentially are accompanied, and like I said, if your browser supports HTML5, chances are it will support these features that we covered. Now, if I'm not sure if my browser supports it, what can I do? Use Moderniser, number one. What else can I do? But that's using Moderniser, right? Oh, the web worker process? True, okay. What else could I do? A more manual process. Anyone remember caniuse.com? Right? And HTML5test.com? So those are two websites where if you go there, it will show you the browser compatibility and what your browser supports. Well, again, usually whenever I start a web project, I always ask what is going to be the my browser audience, if you will, right? Well, we have to come to an answer, okay? So, right. So if you're doing an in-house app, they'll say we're using Chrome or we're using IE Edge and using the latest version and or a specific version. And if a user has a problem using a previous version of a browser, well, then they're kindly told to update. But for some organizations, they want to reach out to every single member of the technical community and non-technical for that matter. So they say we need to support all browsers. Naturally, that's going to increase the number of work that goes into it because now I got to do all these checks for the different versions of the browser. Okay? As a recap, we talked about web workers, which are essentially used for doing what? So concurrency, right? So it's simulated multi-threading. We don't really have multi-threading in JavaScript, but this mimics multi-threading in the sense that we can run several processes concurrently. Can we run more than one process concurrently? And how do can we send messages to and from the web proc? From the worker to the boss. Yes, we can go either way. Right. We also talked about WebSockets. What is WebSocket's bias? And the server, right? So with WebSockets, what advantages does it have over AJAX? It stays open. What else? Bi-directional. What else? It's low level, low latency, and
Hard to understand, so they can't fire you.
and essentially once I have the connection open, either process can send or receive multiple times. Geolocation, what do I need to do that? I need an updated browser, right, that supports the geolocation. And what else do I need to run the geolocation API? Permission from the user. Once I give permission and I'm able to execute, what are the different things the geolocation API gives me? The coordinates, the speeds, right? And last but not least, web storage. What do we learn about web storage? We can store stuff on the client. How do we store them? You point to C/ and you can go to town, right? Not quite. So it's stored within the browser's temporary directory, and so essentially once we clear the cache, we're clearing out the storage, and storage comes in two flavors. What are they? So session and local. And local will not expire. Session will expire once the session is closed. Okay. If you're interested in learning more, we're putting together a course around this material, going into a lot more in depth. Feel free to reach out to nistechnologies.com. We do consulting, education, as well as building custom applications. And again, the URL for that is nistechnologies.com. I have some business cards and some laptop stickers if you're interested. Also, my contact information, Nasr at NIS Technologies. You can also find me on Twitter, and I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Before we close out, being that it's the holidays, there aren't many things happening, but I did want to mention the upcoming event for SQL Saturday. And SQL Saturday is going to be happening in Cleveland on February 2nd. That is a Saturday. As the name suggests, SQL Saturday. How many have attended a SQL Saturday before? Okay. For those of you that have not, may I ask why? Do you not use data in your applications? Regardless whether you love or hate SQL, how many of you write applications using data? Right? So there will be a time, you're gonna find something that's gonna be useful throughout that day. They're gonna have multiple tracks covering database administration, development, BI, and several other tracks. I will be presenting there on 14 T-SQL commands you may not know. And it's gonna be the biggest SQL Saturday ever to happen in Cleveland. I don't wanna say ever worldwide, but certainly in Cleveland. And it's going to be held over at Highland Software. To register for it, go to SQLSaturday.com, and they assign every event a number. The event in Cleveland is going to be 8/21. Okay. It's going to be in a newer building of Highland, and it's going to accommodate much larger capacity. What's the cost for registration? Okay, so that's right. So it's $0 if you're planning on bagging a lunch, and a whopping $10, I believe, if you plan to eat lunch there. What's another advantage? Well, again, it can be free if you don't buy lunch there. That's always been the case, true. So what's another advantage of attending these other than the technical portion? Networking, right? You want to mingle with others, find out who's working in the field, find out, share experiences. It's always good to expand your network. All right, so with that, any other questions before we close out for this evening? I'll share that with on the meetup site. Okay. So I'll give you a chance to finish your evals, And while you're doing that, just wanted to let you know we have a couple prize drawings. This handsome T-shirt that says "Accepting Cookies." Unfortunately, I don't have a T-shirt for local storage, but and then the other. Any guesses what this is? Pair programming. Get it? I didn't come up with the designs. All right. So this is one size fits all or extra large, whichever your preference is. I have business cards. If there's any questions, I can answer for you. So if you would please pass your emails down to the center of the room and I'll collect them. Let's do pens all down, straight down.
Yeah, where it says, please explain. Yeah. Okay, fine, we'll go to more explanations there.
You got yours? Just like the name on it?
Robin, is it over already?
I'm sorry?
Oh, you're gonna run that demo for us?
The one that spawns multiple thousands of processes?
Yeah.
Would be happy to. Sure. But they're gonna, I mean, it's gonna be the same result, right? Yeah. But I think what he's after is he wants to see my system come to a crawl.